Marco Pierre White was the chef every other chef wanted to be, the youngest ever with 3 Michelin stars, the gold standard of British fine dining. But here's where it gets interesting. His restaurant empire was legendary in name, yet behind the kitchen doors, the business was quietly cracking under its own weight, with escalating rents, chaotic staffing, and deals that traded control for speed. How does the most respected chef in Britain go from myth to financial meltdown in a few short years? To find out, you have to start at the night Harvey's first opened its doors. Harvey's opened in 1987, tucked away in Wandsworth, with a chef at the stove who would soon be called the most intense in London. Marco Pierre White was just 25. He worked 14, sometimes 15 hours a day, rarely leaving the kitchen, sleeves rolled, apron stained, eyes locked on every plate. The brigade around him moved with the same single-minded focus. Fish, meat, pastry, larder, each section drilled to Marco's standard, not the industry's. Orders barked, pans slammed, and the expectation was simple: perfection or start again. The early reviews did not just praise the food, they described a new kind of pressure. Critics compared the experience to Kaufmann's La Tante Claire, but with a sharper edge. Word spread about the hand-cut chips, the bespoke sauces, the sense that everything was crafted for that night alone. 2 Michelin stars came quickly. The waiting list grew longer. For regulars, Harvey's was not just a reservation, it was a story to tell, a badge of culinary courage. By the end of the first year, Marco's reputation was set. He was not just running a restaurant, he was setting a benchmark. Harvey's became the kitchen where young chefs came to be broken down and rebuilt. The public saw a genius at work. The industry saw a standard they would have to chase for years. Scarcity turned into status. And every night, the myth grew stronger, one plate at a time. In 1995, the Michelin Guide awarded Marco Pierre White its highest honor, 3 stars. At just 33 years old, he became the youngest chef to reach that summit, and the first British chef to do it on home soil. The press called him a phenomenon. Headlines ran with words like revolutionary and force of nature. Critics who once whispered about his wildness now queued for a table. The restaurant Marco Pierre White at Hyde Park Hotel turned away more guests than it could seat. Bookings filled months in advance. Regulars who once strolled in found themselves begging for a spot. The pressure outside the kitchen grew as quickly as the demand inside. Food writers circled, hoping for a glimpse of the man behind the legend. Investors and hoteliers started calling. Everyone wanted a piece of the magic. The 3-star badge did not just crown Marco's talent, it turned his name into a commercial force. Suddenly, the question was not just how to keep up with the queue, it was how to multiply it. The industry watched closely. Here was proof that British cooking could stand with the French at the highest level. But as the myth grew, so did the expectations. For every table he could not seat, there was a business plan waiting to turn that scarcity into scale. The legend was no longer just about the food. It was about how far the Marco Pierre White name could go. By the early 2010s, Marco Pierre White's name was no longer just a fixture above grand hotel doors or splashed across the London restaurant scene. The next phase came with speed, licensing, franchising, and a new kind of partner. In 2009, Nick Taplin entered the picture, a hospitality operator with a knack for scaling brands. Together they launched a licensing engine that would transform the business overnight. The first steakhouse bar and grill opened in Leeds, and within a few years the portfolio ballooned to 16 sites across the UK hotels, airport lounges, city centres. If there was foot traffic, there was room for an MPW-branded venue. This was not the old model of chef-driven kitchens. The mechanics were different. Taplin's Black and White Hospitality handled the rollout, franchise agreements, menu development, staff training, and daily operations. White provided the aura, the signature, the menu touches, but the day-to-day belonged to the operators. For property owners and hoteliers, it was a shortcut to prestige. For Marco, it was a way to multiply his reach without standing over the pass. The deal terms were never made public, But industry standards suggest royalties on gross sales, with franchisees covering fit-outs and running costs. The brand became elastic. Steakhouse bar and grill, New York Italian, Wheelers, Chop House, each concept tailored for a different market segment. By 2013, the Black and White master franchise had created a network of MPW restaurants stretching from Birmingham to Cardiff, with international ambitions already on the table. But the speed of the rollout brought new headaches. Maintaining standards across a dozen or more sites meant relying on systems, not just a name. Each new opening added another link in the chain, another potential weak spot. The machine was impressive, but it was also running hot. For the first time, the fate of the empire depended less on the chef and more on the mechanics of the brand itself. Every new restaurant added another layer of strain. The rent bill alone could swallow a site whole. Central London leases often demanded 10 to 15% of gross revenue, regardless of how many tables were full. In hotel partnerships, the numbers rarely favoured the operator. Even a packed dining room could not always outrun the fixed costs waiting at the end of the month. Staffing brought its own headaches. The industry average for annual turnover hovered around 30%, but in high-pressure, branded kitchens, that figure climbed even higher. Training a new brigade for each opening meant endless cycles of onboarding, skill gaps, and morale dips. The original Harvey's model, tight, loyal, relentless, did not scale when the team ballooned across 16 sites. The myth of the chef's eye on every plate became impossible to sustain. Consistency, once the empire's calling card, started to slip. Recipes were standardized, but execution wavered. The same steak might arrive perfectly charred in Leeds but overcooked in Cardiff. Guests who expected a story instead found a template. Each concept, steakhouse, chop house, New York Italian, needed its own supply chain, its own training manual, its own oversight. Suppliers, stretched thin by unpredictable orders and late payments, began to push back. Some sites ran out of signature ingredients mid-service, others cut corners to keep costs down. Management became a game of telephone. Decisions filtered through layers, franchisees, area managers, corporate teams, slowing response times and muddying accountability. A problem in one kitchen could ripple across the network before anyone at the top noticed. The more the brand expanded, the less control Marco or his partners actually held. What started as a machine built for perfection was now a web of friction points, each one quietly eroding the foundation beneath the empire. Guests who once dressed for dinner at the Oak Room began to notice the difference. The hush of anticipation that used to hang over the dining room gave way to a quieter, more uncertain energy. Plates still arrived with precision, but the sense of occasion was fading. Regulars whispered about changes in the menu, prices trimmed, favorites missing, the new head chef's touch less daring than Marco's. Some diners shrugged it off as evolution. Others felt the magic slipping away. Behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Suppliers who had once boasted about serving the Oak Room started to worry about late payments. Invoices lingered. Deliveries arrived with substitutions or shortfalls. Vendors who had grown used to Marco's relentless standards now found themselves chasing the accounts team, not the chef. For some, patience wore thin. The sense of pride in supplying a 3-star kitchen was replaced by anxiety about getting paid at all. The general manager watched the numbers with growing unease. Each month, the gap between revenue and costs widened. Staff grumbled about tighter schedules and rumours of redundancies. The brigade, once a model of discipline, felt the tension in every briefing. The Oak Room had always thrived on pressure, but this was different. The pressure wasn't about perfection anymore, it was about survival. The warning signs were everywhere, but from the outside, the restaurant still looked like the height of London dining. The Oak Room had always been more than a restaurant. For years, it was the jewel in Marco Pierre White's crown, a dining room where reputations were made and broken, where every service felt like a high-wire act. But in February 2002, the doors closed for good. The news landed with a jolt across the industry. 30 staff, 15 from the kitchen and 15 from the front of house, were told their jobs were gone. There were no written contracts, so even the process of letting people go turned cold and transactional. Some had worked there since the move to Les Meridiens Piccadilly in 1997, pouring years into the place, only to find their service counted from the day the company changed hands, not the day they first tied an apron. The press ran headlines about the end of an era. The Oak Room had once held 3 Michelin stars and boasted the highest possible rating for service and setting. Now there was a winding up notice and a silent dining room. Staff gathered their knives, their jackets, and memories of long nights chasing a standard that no longer paid the bills. For many, there was no severance, just a handshake and a reminder that the industry moves on. Some drifted to other kitchens, others left hospitality altogether. The closure was not just a business failure, it was a rupture, a signal that the magic could not outrun the math. The Oak Room's fall was the first clear break in the empire, a headline that made the private strain impossible to ignore. On December 23rd, 1999, Marco Pierre White cooked his final service at the Oak Room. He handed back his 3 Michelin stars and stepped out of the kitchen, announcing his retirement from active cooking. For most chefs, that would have been the end of the story, a clean break, a legendary exit. But instead of winding down, the business took a different path. Rather than simplify, rather than protect what was left of the original magic, the empire doubled down. Now here is the crucial turning point. The name Marco Pierre White, already a byword for culinary perfection, became the centerpiece of a new strategy. Licensing deals, branding partnerships, and franchising agreements multiplied. The chef was no longer at the stove, but his signature was everywhere, on menus, on signage, in glossy hotel brochures. Partners saw an opportunity to scale up, to turn aura into revenue. Hotels and developers lined up to buy a piece of the legend. It looked from the outside like a victory lap. More venues opened, more concepts rolled out, each promising a taste of the original fire. But the math was changing. The more the brand stretched, the thinner the connection to Marco's own standards became. Each new deal meant another layer of management, another location to oversee, another set of costs to cover. The original brigade, tight, loyal, relentless, was replaced by operators and franchisees, each with their own priorities. The business was no longer built on the nightly pursuit of perfection. It was built on the hope that the name alone could hold everything together. The decision to expand through licensing was not just a business move, it hardened the path ahead. The risks multiplied, but the control slipped away. What had once been a single focused kitchen became a sprawling network, each piece pulling at the others. The promise of scale turned into a trap. When the numbers stopped working, there would be no way to pull back, only the long, public unraveling that comes when aura cannot pay the bills. On September 11, 2001, MPW Criterion Limited entered voluntary liquidation. The company owed creditors an estimated £3.6 million, a figure that dwarfed even the most optimistic projections for recovery. The Oak Room, once the pride of London's fine dining scene, had already begun to falter after Marco Pierre White left, but now the numbers were inescapable. The winding up notice was a public admission that the empire's debts could not be managed, not by cost-cutting, not by menu tweaks, not by the memory of 3 Michelin stars. About 30 staff at the Oak Room, 15 in the kitchen and 15 out front, were told their jobs were gone. Without written contracts, redundancy pay was calculated from the company's brief period of ownership, not from the years many had actually served. Robert Reed, who had taken over as head chef, saw 9 years of work recognized as only 4. For some, the end came with a handshake and little else. For others, there was only the shock of being left out of pocket just as the industry slowed for winter. Suppliers who had once counted on the prestige of serving the Oak Room now found themselves among the long list of creditors. Invoices went unpaid for months. Some vendors wrote off thousands, knowing they would never recover the full amount. The sense of pride that once came from supplying a 3-star kitchen was replaced by anxiety and frustration. The headlines told one story, another casualty in the brutal world of London restaurants. Inside, the mood was heavier. For the brigade, the closure was not just about lost wages. It was the loss of a place where years of effort and sacrifice had been poured into every service. For creditors, it was an expensive lesson in the fragility of even the most storied brands. The liquidation did not just end an era. It left a scar, a reminder that no amount of reputation could cover the gap when the bills came due. Today, Marco Pierre White's name still draws crowds, but his empire is a warning. In a market where over 1,400 UK restaurants closed in 2023 alone, Aura can't outlast broken systems. The myth survives, but the margins always win. For every new chef, that's the rule written in the balance sheet, not the biography. What matters now isn't legend, it's resilience. Let me know your thoughts in the comments.